Somewhere in Turkey, about 11,000 years ago, someone built the world's first known temple. We call it Göbekli Tepe. It's older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, older than the pyramids by 7,000 years, built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly hadn't invented agriculture yet. And right beside it, chemical evidence of large-scale alcohol production. The oldest known human monument on Earth was built next to a brewery, which tells you something important about what humans have always needed to build anything worth building. But that's not even where the story starts. Before we get to humans, Persencita, we need to talk about animals. Because here's something your biology teacher probably left out. Animals get high, constantly, on purpose. Reindeer in Siberia actively seek out psychedelic mushrooms and eat them deliberately, then spin in circles, then stumble around looking deeply confused about their own existence. Elephants walk extraordinary distances to find fermented fruit. They will travel miles out of their normal range specifically to find rotten marula berries and get drunk on them. Wallabies in Tasmania have been documented eating wild opium poppies, hopping in circles through poppy fields, and then collapsing. Australian farmers have had to report this as an actual agricultural problem. High wallabies, destroying crops, being a menace. And then there are dolphins. Dolphins have been observed carefully, deliberately passing pufferfish between each other and gently chewing on them, just enough to extract a tiny dose of neurotoxin. Then floating at the surface, mouths open, staring at nothing. These are some of the most intelligent animals on the planet, and they found the drugfish. Researcher Ronald Siegel spent decades documenting this behavior across species and concluded that the pursuit of intoxication might be a fourth basic biological drive. Right alongside hunger, thirst, and reproduction. Not a quirk, not an accident. A drive. Which means when ancient humans discovered psychoactive plants, they weren't doing something strange. They were following instinct so old it predates humanity itself. So when exactly did humans start using drugs? The honest answer is, we don't fully know. And the reason we don't know is fascinating in itself. Most psychoactive substances leave almost no trace in the archaeological record. The plant rots. The smoke disappears. The person is long dead. Even their bones are probably dust. The only way we find evidence is if something miraculous happens. Residue preserved in a sealed container. Traces in hair kept somewhere cold and dry. Pollen locked in sediment by sheer geological accident. Everything we've found is almost certainly just the beginning of a much longer story. With that firmly in mind, here's what we actually have. The oldest direct evidence of psychoactive drug use anywhere on Earth comes from ancient China. Chemical traces of cannabis found in wooden burning bowls at burial sites, about 4,600 years old. And here's the detail that makes this vivid. Archaeologists found a harp at the same site. These people were burning cannabis, playing music, and weeping at a funeral, which honestly sounds better than most funerals today. In Europe, a cave on the island of Minorca gives us a 3,000-year-old sealed tube made of antler bone. Inside, human hair. And when researchers analyzed that hair in a modern lab, they found traces of multiple powerful psychedelic compounds from nightshade plants. Scopolamine, atropine, ephedrine. These are not gentle substances. Scopolamine alone causes powerful hallucinations and what ancient accounts describe as out-of-body experiences. Atropine can induce full delirium. The hair analysis showed this wasn't a one-time experiment. This person was consuming these substances regularly, over at least a year. This was a discipline, a profession, a practice. In the Americas, peyote cactus buttons have been dated to 6,000 years ago. Mushroom carvings across Mexico suggest psilocybin ceremonies at least 2,500 years old, though the real dates are almost certainly much older. Everywhere humans went, they found the psychoactive plants, and they used them. Here's what stops most people cold when they actually sit with this. Almost every single piece of ancient evidence we have for drug use isn't recreational, it's religious. Cannabis burned to communicate with the dead. Peyote used exclusively in sacred ceremony. Nightshade consumed by what appears to be a ritual specialist, a mediator between the living and whatever came after. Psychedelic mushrooms depicted alongside gods in cultures that never met each other, never shared a language, never traded a single idea. And yet, the framework is almost identical everywhere. Take the substance, enter the altered state, cross a threshold, commune with ancestors, receive what ordinary consciousness cannot access. Some anthropologists now believe psychedelics might actually be the origin point of religion itself, not metaphorically, literally. The idea that there is something beyond ordinary reality, spirits, gods, ancestors, afterlife, might have first crystallized in human culture through a psychedelic experience. When a Paleolithic shaman consumed a mushroom and encountered something that felt more real than reality, and then returned to their community and tried to describe what they had seen. That might have been the first time a human being said with genuine conviction, "There is another world." And then there's alcohol. The oldest known brewery on Earth is at a site called Rakafet Cave in Israel, 13,000 years old. Natufian hunter-gatherers, nomadic people who hadn't yet settled into permanent agricultural communities, were already brewing and consuming fermented grain beverages. They were nomadic brewers, living in caves, making beer before they made cities. This brings us to one of the most genuinely contested debates in archaeology: the beer before bread hypothesis. The idea, proposed seriously by multiple researchers, is that humans didn't begin the long, difficult process of cultivating grain primarily to make food. They did it at least in significant part to make beer, that the world's first farmers might have been motivated by the desire for a reliable, sustainable supply of fermented grain drinks. Most archaeologists consider this an overstatement. You need bread to survive, and beer is technically optional, but the debate itself reveals something important. From the very beginning, the production of intoxicants was not separate from the development of civilization. It was woven into it. Now, there is a theory. Let's be absolutely clear. A theory, not a proven fact. So controversial, so genuinely strange, that mentioning it at the wrong academic conference can end conversations. It's called the Stoned Ape Hypothesis, proposed by ethnobotanist Terence McKenna in 1992. Around 2 million years ago, our hominid ancestors were following large grazing animals across the African savanna. Where there are large grazing animals, there is dung. And growing in that dung across the African grasslands are psilocybin mushrooms. McKenna proposed that early humans began eating these mushrooms while foraging, and that the cognitive effects of psilocybin, enhanced visual acuity, better pattern recognition, increased creative thinking, greater social bonding, experienced repeatedly over generations, catalyzed a dramatic acceleration in brain development. In other words, we became human because our ancestors ate mushrooms growing in manure. Sit with that. Now, is this correct? Probably not in the specific way McKenna described. You cannot biologically inherit the experience of a drug trip. That's not how genetics works. The timeline is fuzzy. There's no direct fossil evidence. But does it point at something real? Psilocybin is a documented neuroplastogen, a compound that literally stimulates the growth of new neural connections. Modern neuroscience has measured this in laboratory settings. Mycologist Paul Stamets, one of the most respected fungi researchers alive, has stated publicly that he finds the core of the hypothesis compelling, not necessarily in the exact form McKenna described, but in the broader sense that the relationship between psychedelic fungi and early human cognitive development might be more significant than mainstream science acknowledges. The hypothesis probably isn't right, but it refuses to die, because if it is, even partially, it is the most darkly funny origin story in existence. The apex predator of the planet, the species that split the atom, composed symphonies, built cathedrals, because some early hominid ate a mushroom out of a pile of dung on the African savanna, and had a very good time. Here's the part that most people miss entirely. Ancient drug culture looked almost nothing like modern drug culture. What we do today, casual, private, individual, recreational, is genuinely quite recent in human history. For most of our past, psychoactive substances were controlled, ritualized, treated with profound respect, often restricted to specific specialists or occasions. They weren't something you did on a Tuesday because you were bored. They were used to grieve, to celebrate, to heal, to understand the cosmos, to cross whatever boundary separated the living from the dead. The Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important religious institutions in the ancient world, practiced continuously for nearly 2,000 years, culminated in the drinking of a substance called the kykeon. Initiates described the experience in nearly identical terms across centuries: dissolution of the self, encounters with the dead, visions of reality that felt more fundamentally true than ordinary waking life. Plato drank it, Aristotle, Cicero, Marcus Aurelius. In 2020, researchers analyzed residue from a drinking cup at an ancient Greek site. The residue contained ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and contains chemical precursors to LSD. The kykeon was psychoactive. The philosophical foundations of Western civilization were constructed, at least in part, in altered states of consciousness. That is not a metaphor. That is a chemical finding from a goblet. Modern clinical research is now slowly rediscovering what ancient cultures spent thousands of years learning. Psilocybin produces lasting relief for treatment-resistant depression. MDMA-assisted therapy shows remarkable results for PTSD. These are not fringe findings. These are peer-reviewed results from major research institutions. We spent several hundred years dismissing the accumulated knowledge of ancient pharmacologists as superstition. We are now spending billions of dollars in laboratories to arrive, carefully and expensively, back at similar conclusions. So when did ancient humans first start using drugs? Before we have evidence of it. Almost certainly before we have the capacity to find evidence of it. What we know is this: every civilization on every continent found the psychoactive plants available in their specific corner of the world. And almost all of them independently concluded the same thing. These substances were not just useful, they were sacred. Somewhere in the 13,000-year-old cave in Israel, a Natufian person lifted what may have been the world's first deliberately fermented drink, took a cautious sip, felt it hit, and had the exact same thought that has crossed billions of minds in every century since. Oh, that's something. The rest, in every sense of the word, is history. Subscribe if that's your kind of thing.